Informer version 5.4 has a few important changes to security, and we're going to look at a few of those. First, under data sources, we will see now that mappings can actually be a part of multiple mapping sets. This should make it simpler for admins to share the corrected access to a mapping. Let's look at an example. In the employees mapping, we can see that both the birth date and the employee ID are restricted. This is indicated by the padlock here. When we share this data source, we can decide which teams get to see which restricted fields. So under our sharing, we can see that Team A has full access. That means they can see all mappings, all fields. Team B and Team C both have restricted access. That means that we can see some mappings based on mapping sets and some fields. So let's look at our mapping sets for Team B. We have restricted access to employee info, no access to product details, and full access to order info. But this restricted access means that we get some restricted fields that are specifically designated, or no restricted fields. That's determined on this tab up here. We can see that we do have access to employee ID, but not to birth date. Again, Team B does not have birth date. We're going to see that again later. For Team C, it has the exact same access as Team B, except that it does have birth date and it does not have employee ID. So those two were flipped. Finally, the last change to security appears under data sets. In previous versions, restricting a field only prevented a user from adding that field to a query that the user was editing. It did nothing to prevent other teams from sharing restricted content. That's no longer the case. So Team A here has built these two data sets. Employees full access uses the same security as our previous versions. It shares all fields regardless of security to teams B and C. Let's take a look here. Under our sharing, we see that there is no field level security. And we can see that there's actually an option here to use data source security, but this one has not selected it. And if we go and impersonate a user from Team B, we'll know that they will see birth date, even though it shouldn't show up on this based on their data source security. We have explicitly granted access to that for this one data set. So let's see that. A user from Team B, I'm going to impersonate them. And there's birth date, just like we thought it would be there. Again, because that was specifically chosen for this data set. Now, if we go back to our super user, we're going to look at this other data set. Employees data source access. Now, this is the exact same data set. It has the same fields, but it's shared with the new security option. Instead of allow all fields, it uses data source security to determine field access. This new option is safer because it allows publishers to share content without worrying if the other team is supposed to be able to see everything. Members from Team B will not be able to see birth date. Members from Team C will be able to see birth date, but they will not be able to see the employee ID. So let's impersonate both of those users and see that. So first from Team B, we can see the employee ID. We cannot see a birth date. And now a member from Team C. We cannot see the employee ID, but now we can see the birth date. So this allows us to be a lot more granular on which fields we give access to which teams. You no longer have to make that all or nothing decision. For security's sake, admins can force your publishers to use data source security to determine field access, that second safer option. This is done under administration, security, always inherit dataset field security from data source. So once you turn this on, you'll no longer be able to share all fields regardless of security. For a more in-depth look at security, please ask us about a training session by emailing training@intrinsic.com. Thank you.